I admired the work being carried out in Malaya by the Department of Aboriginal Affairs and spent much time as a journalist with the Malay Mail visiting their various outposts in the Ulu, or the jungle as we call it. But I could not entirely stifle a sneaking suspicion that in their carefully selective preservation of a traditionally nomadic lifestyle, they may not always be getting the balance right. The lure of the urban cash economy was pernicious and deadly. For those Orang Asli who did not retreat into the rainforest to escape its smothering embrace, the rot had inevitably begun. And seeing its consequences, I could only speculate how long it would be before all that had so far survived would be swept into the forgotten recesses of history. Most of the department's dedicated staff were themselves trained anthropologists. For years they had been led by Richard Noon, appointed in 1953 as the government's advisor on Aboriginal affairs by no less than General Templer himself. 20 years earlier, Noon's brother Pat had pioneered Aboriginal protection by persuading the government to establish Aboriginal land reservations, where the Orang Asli would be free to live according to their own laws and traditions. Pat Noon, who laid the groundwork for the future government policy towards the Orang Asli, had died mysteriously in 1943, when, like Spencer Chapman, he elected to remain behind the lines to afford whatever protection he could to his Aboriginal protégés during the Japanese occupation. Investigating the circumstances of Pat's death, his brother Richard Noon discovered many years later, after a prolonged search described in Dennis Holman's book Noon of the Ulu, that his brother had been murdered with a poisoned blowpipe by a member of his adopted Temiar tribe who coveted Pat's Aboriginal wife. Pat himself had entertained no illusions regarding the potential for violence among these ordinarily shy and peaceful people. He had recorded his observation that a husband whose wife has run away and is living permanently with another man may either revenge himself indirectly by gaining the aid of a sorcerer, or directly by blowpiping or spearing the man who has supplanted him. Richard Noon made it possible for me to visit and interview members of the Senoi Pra, literally the Fighting People Regiment, which he had established with arms and training provided by the British Special Air Service. Where ethnic loyalties were concerned, the Orang Asli had proved largely an unknown factor in the emergency response equation. Historically, they had received a raw deal. Once the Briggs Plan began to kick in with its restrictions on food supplies from urban areas, the terrorists operating from bases deep within the jungle had depended increasingly on Aboriginal tribes, whom they endeavored to indoctrinate and on whom they called for both food and intelligence. Richard Noon saw the creation of an Aboriginal fighting force as an important countermeasure, both through the Senoi Pra and the increased steps taken to extend the protection afforded to these jungle-dwelling primitives. Aboriginal loyalties were steadily won over to cooperate with the security forces deployed in their tribal areas. Thanks to help I received from Noon and his colleagues, it was possible for me to visit whatever remote ladangs, or temporary agricultural clearings, and longhouses could be reached within a reasonable walking distance of the nearest road. At night I would sleep on the bamboo trellised floors of thatched atap houses in high jungle clearings, learning how young men and women recruited from different Aboriginal tribes were applying their skills as barefoot doctors, running clinics supplied with medical necessities by airdrops, and keeping in touch with headquarters on their ham radios. They came from often quite distinct racial groups, ranging from the Negrito in the north and the more prolific Temia and Semi-Senoi of the central regions to the Jakun and Semelai of the south. Although the kinky-haired Negrito were mistakenly seen as the more ancient strain, the Jakun were in fact deemed to be the first true orangutan, or jungle men, to inhabit the peninsula, while the Temia had migrated down from the central highlands of Indochina. Noon later discovered that one of the tribes with whom he worked was related to the Montagnard tribes of the central highlands of Vietnam. In the early 1960s, with the encouragement and support of American advisors stationed in that country, he led a special forces team composed of ethnic Malayo-Polynesian tribesmen to collaborate with the Montagnard tribes in their resistance to the Viet Cong. According to Mario Miraci, who researched this anthropological oddity, the two groups were so similar that virtually no linguistic or cultural barrier existed between them. However, the Vietnamese government attached to Noon's expedition a Vietnamese unit from its own special forces. The Vietnamese became suspicious of Noon's men because of their ethnic closeness to the Montagnard, whom the Vietnamese had never really trusted, and the resulting animosity became so unbearable that Noon had to request his team's removal from Vietnam. Noon subsequently became a counterinsurgency advisor to the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, or SEATO. He died in 1973 in Bangkok, Thailand.